My name is Tierney Brown, and I'm a cultural anthropologist. Today I'm going to talk about material culture, which is the way that we make meaning through objects in our everyday lives. And so I am a cultural anthropologist. This means that I'm really interested in the everyday practices that we use to make meaning in our lives. Also, how these build up to really big festivals and rituals. But anthropology is also really interested in everyday things, what you do, how you build up to those big moments in your lives, and how that changes over time with globalization, with urbanization, and with modern work. And so when I talk about material culture, I do mean things that are in museums, art, historical objects, but I also mean the things that we use every single day in our kitchens, in our gardens, and in our workplaces. How do we approach these kinds of varied objects in order to make knowledge from them and connect them to the ways that we're living our lives? And so first, I'm going to talk about the material culture we find in museums and how we do some research there. And then I'm going to talk about some methods for how we can approach material culture with science, with cultural understanding to build new kinds of stories. And finally, I'm going to give just a glimpse of some collaborative research. And so I work for the American Museum of Natural History in New York City in the US. And this museum is quite old. It was founded in 1869, which means that it is 157 years old right now. And that comes with some value in terms of we have a really large reach. We are the 11th most visited museum in the world right now, and a real trove of collections from which we can continue to do research. And beyond just the physical museum in New York City, we also have a lot of online resources. So we have 25.4 million digital visitors every year, and that includes teacher resources, educational resources for all different kinds of science. And so our mission is to discover, interpret, and disseminate knowledge, and that's knowledge about the natural world around us, knowledge about the planets and planetary science, knowledge about the environment, especially as it's changing, and knowledge about cultures all around the world and how we can connect to those ideas. And so my role is called the Buddhism Public Scholar, and the museum is really trying to build new connections to diverse communities both around the world, and also, because we are fortunate to be in New York City, all of the diverse communities within our own city in order to understand how culture is a really living kind of thing and how we can tell those kinds of stories today. So here you can see a glimpse of a project that I've been working on where we're rewriting some of the historical displays in the museum. And it's a display of cham masks, labap. And I was able to work with a local community to bring in monks from the Nyingma Palyu Dharma Center in order to demonstrate some of the cham right before Losar, so that visitors to the museum, people who haven't had a chance to encounter these traditions before, can really understand this as well as receive some of these wonderful teachings. And so when you hear about cultural anthropology, perhaps you think about people who spend a lot of time in villages, and that can also be true. But the village that I work in is here in Thimphu, in Kawajangsa, at the National Library and Archives of Bhutan. So I'm doing an anthropology of work. How are we producing knowledge, everyday practices that are really building new resources for the next generation? I especially work with conservators and librarians to think about how do we take care of the past? What does that actually mean, and how is that changing over time? So here you can see one of the conservators, Kamal Pokwa, who is demonstrating how to clean a Chenre Zig ku. And here you can see that it's not just about taking care of the ku, it's also about transmitting some of that knowledge to the next generation, transmitting how meaningful these objects are, as well as, well, what does it mean to take care of something in Bhutan? And how do you know about the past? And so here you can see some of the archivists at the National Library and Archive sorting through an archive of modern Bhutan. What will the next generation of researchers have access to? How will they document all of the modernization and changes and institutions that really make Bhutan what it is able to accomplish today? and how those resources are actively being built and understood as an act of care itself for thinking about the past and the future generations. And so here in Bhutan, I think it's so interesting to learn more about what it means to have a living heritage. And where does heritage actually live? In the daily practices of people, in the work lives and home lives, and how people navigate all of the changes going on and still continue to bring very Bhutanese ideas to all of these changes going on. I think here in Bhutan, heritage does not necessarily have to be old. And so there are a lot of lessons that we can learn around the world from these valuable traditions. And so first, I want to pause and say, well, how do anthropologists think about culture? Sometimes we hear about culture as a sort of received set of traditions. And sometimes that can feel like a set of rules that we have to follow. A set of guides, how to do a particular ritual, or a set of ways of behaving around certain people, a way of speaking, etc. Well, that's also a framework with which we can build and act in meaningful ways. It's also a search for meaning, how we can interact with other people to convey what is important to us and in order to accomplish our own goals. And some anthropologists have thought about culture as a kind of game, a maze that we all have to navigate when we make choices about which obligations we will fulfill and what we will ask of other people. How do we navigate that over time? And finally, some anthropologists have thought about culture as a way of being in the world. What are the environments around us, whether that is a pristine forest or a new building in a city? How are we making knowledge from the things we experience? How are we telling our story? How are we choosing different actions? What kind of traditions and ways of knowing can we recognize and engage with that sort of move us into a larger understanding of culture? Here in Bhutan, I particularly like to think with this one definition of culture from Clifford Geertz. And he says, "Man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. I take culture to be those webs." And I like this definition because it has a metaphor. And the spiderweb metaphor really works well for culture because you don't immediately see it maybe. You're walking along and then all of a sudden you're caught in the spider web. It's something that you can feel, and especially it's something that happens in between people. Culture has to be performed, acted, lived in between different people. But the nice thing about the spider web metaphor is that we can spin those webs. We can reach out to other people to make requests, to include them, to make new meaningful connections. And sometimes we can also feel pulled in different directions by people. We can be brought into new projects, brought into obligations, and help care for other people. And all of this happens in between us with these subtle pulls, just like a spider web. And so, if culture is something that is happening in between us and something that's always changing, well, how do we work with culture in museums, and why do we collect material culture objects? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a historical project at the American Museum of Natural History that sort of explains why we have these kinds of collections. So here we have a map that was drawn in 1896. And at this time, American researchers had seen there are these cultural connections across the Bering Strait between the US and Russia. And they were very curious about how these communities connected. Had they moved across this strait over time? How could they understand all of these connections across some really icy waters? And so the Jessup North Pacific expedition took 5 years and sent an entire team of researchers to both Siberia as well as the American Northwest coast to collect objects and spend time with communities, document what they were seeing in the everyday practices, the meaning behind all of these objects, and collect information so that scientists could understand the relationship over time between these communities. This expedition gathered over 5,200 objects and brought them to the museum so that they could be studied and especially kept for the next generations. And so here you can see them in storage, where these objects continue to be cared for. But the exciting thing about these collections is that each generation brings a new set of questions to our collections. And so after all of the changes that happened in Russia over the 20th century, indigenous communities had really felt distanced from their traditional culture and had lost a lot of knowledge about those times and traditions that were not possible. And so here you can see some Sakha researchers who have come to the museum in order to do new research and connect to these collections objects, to connect to things that they did know about, as well as learn more about some of the things that had been lost over time. And so they're doing new research in order to look at these objects and especially revive some of these traditions today. This was a very expansive project, and so they were also able to work with object conservators who take care of these objects in order to connect to local artists to look at all of the techniques for producing these objects, for producing objects today that artists are still doing because these are really living traditions, and to recognize both new knowledge that is in the historical collection, as well as contribute new ideas to artist practice and communities' connection to their history. And so this kind of collaborative research really benefits both institutions, and this is the direction that museums are really looking to go now with their material culture collections. We really want to build ongoing relationships with communities that help build resources for both sides. And so I'll share a little bit about a project that I had the good chance to work on. And this project was really aimed at adding diversity to who gets to talk about something like art. And so here you can see the entry to a spectacular exhibition of really large devotional paintings that are held by the National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. And these objects have been in the US for quite some time and have a very strong connection to American communities of Pushti-Marg Hindu practitioners. And so as part of this, we were able as a museum team to visit a haveli in the US, in Pennsylvania, connect to the community, and talk to all them about the practices that they continue to bring to life so that we could talk about these objects not just as art, but also really meaningful objects that people use in their everyday lives as a way to connect to really significant frames of meaning and the divine. And because we were able to visit communities and lead groups of museum experts who were designing the exhibition through understanding these paintings, we were able to put all these different touches in the exhibition. So here you can see our lighting designer, after talking with community members, after learning about all of the designs hidden within the artwork, had these really charming designs on the floor of the exhibition to lead you through the space in a really meaningful way, to lead you towards the gopis dancing with Krishna. And we also had a lot more community members visit the exhibition because of this. We had really positive feedback from the general public who knew nothing about this tradition before they came. And so this is a really wonderful way that we can think about knowledge building together. Here you can see something from our website, Interactive, where we wanted to say there isn't just one way to look at these objects. So often in a museum, we think about a curator label who is telling us what we should see in these art pieces. But here, the curator is only one voice. So here we can see in the yellow circle, there's an art historian, the curator, who's describing the content for this exhibition, Dr. Deborah Diamond, who does a spectacular job of storytelling about what's going on here. But you also have, in the pink square, a conservation scientist who is using different types of images to learn about how this painting was made, the types of mineral pigments that were available and no longer accessible, or the ways in which artists were immediately taking up new innovative pigments that became available to them in order to make the most bright, brilliant painting possible to capture people's attention. And finally, we have the community advisor voices in this orange triangle. And these are my favorite. I was able to conduct these interviews looking with community members at these paintings to see how they connect to these paintings, to see how they find stories that the art historian and the conservator could never tell. And so ways that this painting allowed them to connect to their faith, to practices, or artist perspectives that draw out the ways in which these palm fronds playfully point your eyes across the painting and really provide our visitors of the museum with different perspectives and really an enriched view of how these objects are meaningful and have many different types of knowledges within them. So, how do we conduct object research? How do we look at an object and start to understand the ways that it connects people, practices, and also ideas? And so I like to think about things like, well, how is this object present for people in communities, in everyday life? And who would have special knowledge about this object? The person who uses it every single day, or the person who made it to begin with? And so, where can I look for more information about this object? Well, the first thing we have to do is describe the object. And so here I've chosen an object that I really hope is familiar to some of you. It's kuru darts. And I chose these because, hopefully you see this and have a reaction to it. It's something familiar to you, and so you can start to think about the qualities that it has. And when we describe an object, there are two big buckets that we might put our description into. Properties, which are the physical ways we describe an object. How long is it? How much does it weigh? What are the materials it is made of? But there are also qualities, and qualities are socially defined. Qualities are the things that we learn to look for once we're familiar with an object. So, you can tell how much this kuru dart weighs, but what is the weight of it in your hand? Is this going to be a good dart for you to throw when everybody is picking their darts, etc.? How do you know what is a good dart? What does the grip feel like? What makes a good or bad kuru, right? And so these are things that we learn over time. Those are all socially defined, and we can also include those in our description in order to recognize all of the knowledge and experience that we have built around this object. And so when you look at an object, I ask you first, ask questions. It's so easy to immediately look for an answer, to try to say, oh, I know about this. But what can we learn by pausing and just looking at something, touching it, smelling it, and turning it over, especially photographs? How can we really spend time with this and sort of process what we're seeing so that we see even more? What are they made of? How are they made? What pieces are involved, put together to make one thing? Are there colors or textures that really help this object perform a particular task? Is it new? Is it old? Has it been used? Even repaired? All of these things, we have to really spend time with the object, looking and asking questions in order to expand what it might mean to us. And so in object-based research, we have this fancy word, échappatoire, for this. But what are the stages in its production? How can we think about every single step along the way? Where did those resources come from? How did they come to the workshop? Who built it? Did they sell it on the market? Did they give it as a gift? Was it used? And especially, how is it discarded when it becomes too worn to use anymore? And so, here are some notes that I took about an object that sometimes goes unnoticed. It's a pecha. And I was thinking, how can I really understand the story that this object has to tell in a museum in the US? And so I started taking notes on the type of paper. And I had to do research. Where does this type of paper come from? What environment? Why do we use desho paper? And it has to do with the chemicals involved that actually prevent pests from eating too much of the paper. And then you can start to see all of these choices people are making, all of these traditions, and all of the steps along the way from the forest to the paper maker to the printing house or the calligrapher, all of the different voices that are contributing to this object, how it's been used, how it's been kept within a home, how it's been used for practice, and how it was moved across the ocean to join an American community. Only after spending a lot of time with this object was I able to design scientific testing in order to ask new kinds of questions. So I was able to do some analysis on the pigments within this in order to connect it even more to places it may have been and the ways in which people made and understood this object. Again, continuing to ask more questions to look for more knowledge before simply having an answer. And finally, I like drawing as a data collection system. Of course, it makes a lot of sense here at VAST to think about the ways that creativity can really inform scientific perspectives. But drawing is important because it slows us down. It asks that we keep looking at something, that we spend time and see how it's made, and it brings together your body and your mind to think and look at these objects. It can help show the relationships that the object has to the world around it, and it also invites some play, some interpretation. It helps you bridge that gap from the physical properties to the qualities that we want to describe in objects. So finally, if any of you are describing your research questions, you've spent time with these objects, I like to think about 3 different qualities for a research question. I like research questions that focus on a specific context or idea, that answer that question with data that we can actually collect, and that expand on a theme of interest to our field. And so together, all of these ideas can sort of drive a research project forward and also help somebody else understand what you are going for in your research. Often, as researchers, we want to use very specific words, really show people how much we know, but our research is so much more meaningful if we can explain it to a cousin, a friend, somebody else who could connect to this project. And so I like research questions that really point to something specific, like how do people across generations connect to Irish cuisine? My family is Irish, right? So from this research question, well, I'll probably talk to people of different ages. I'll be asking them about food, and I'll probably focus on Irish traditions, foodways, environments. Already just from a question, you can see the shape of the research taking, and it gives us a real direction for the project to go. When we're looking to answer questions with our research, sometimes they call this an argument in school, but it's not a definitive answer. It's just a position that starts a conversation, invites more people to join us in talking about this material culture, in talking about these traditions, in talking about the kind of knowledge we want to share with more people. So what does this look like? Now we get to hopefully the most exciting part, the glimpse of some ongoing research. And so over the summer, I worked together with some collaborators in order to do interviews about the kinds of things that touch everyday life here in Bhutan, and especially in Thimphu. And so our questions had to do with what are everyday ways of being Bhutanese that really help you feel connected, even if it isn't, well, capital H heritage or tradition, but connected to other people around you, connected to significance and meaning, and also give you structures to help accomplish your goals, to help you care for your loved ones, and connect to the environment around you. And I also was thinking about how can we bridge some of the gaps that everywhere in the world is feeling, young and old, near and far, all of these ways that sometimes can feel like they separate people, but material culture, everyday objects help us bridge those gaps. And who do we want to hear more from? Who have we not met before? So here you can see a glimpse of, we have 5 interviews. We spoke with Puzokong, somebody who makes incense. We spoke with somebody who does natural textile dyeing, because all of these beautiful clothes worn in Bhutan, how do we actually make that? How does that come into being? And then on the other side, how do we care for those old textiles? We spoke with a textile conservator about how she thinks about caring for things over time. We spoke to a datsi maker. How does this really iconic taste of Bhutan come to our tables? And a wood carver about how to make something that fills so many homes here in Bhutan with really beautiful structures and important meanings. And so I don't do this research alone. I don't think anybody can accomplish these kinds of projects alone. And so I worked with a research team. I worked with Wang Ranagurung from VAST as an artist to do live sketches, to look really closely at these objects, to do art that was more beautiful than I myself could do to share these stories. I worked with Nimet Tsering, who composed Dzongkha abstracts and summaries of our research so that we could share this broadly. And of course, I worked with Yangday, a journalist here in Bhutan, to really connect to people and write up short stories about how these objects connect to people, and also how all of these different makers and entrepreneurs found these crafts and arts. How did they come to that when there are so many options available today? And what does it mean to them to work in these traditions? And so I would like to introduce my collaborative co-author, Yangday.
Kuzongpala, my name is Yangday. I am a freelance writer and I'm part of the Drawn from Thimphu project team. It was very interesting to be a part of this project because this is my first time seeing my own culture and heritage from a different perspective. It was very fun working on this project, and for my part, I'll talk a little bit about the stories that we worked on and the individuals that we spoke to. First, let's start with Choing Hamo. She is my age, and it was really fun to talk to someone my age who's working in this industry. Her focus was especially on natural dyeing. It was very interesting for me to learn about it. But yeah, working with colors, you never really think about where they come from and what kind of materials we use to get the colors from. So it's very fascinating to learn that all the colors that we need are already available in the nature. So that's first. Second, the knowledge of getting these colors from this natural raw materials is something which is very sacred. Not many people know about how to extract natural colors from natural materials. So that was something interesting to learn. And the third, that she inherited this business from her mother. In Bhutan, most of the mothers, they weave. My mother, she also weaves. And sadly, I never picked up that skill from her. But she is taking over the business from her mother. She started in I think 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if I'm not wrong. And she picked up this business. She learned about how to do natural dyeing. And she also supports a bunch of women who weave the kira from this natural dyeing. So it's a very interesting process. We scheduled a meeting with her. We went to her shop. We looked at all you can see in the pictures here, you can see all the colors and the materials that we used. One of the most fascinating is the knowledge. She spoke about how slow the process is. We are so used to going to a shop, buying a pigment, but this is very different. It also keeps you in touch with your patience and mindfulness of extracting the colors. It's not something easy that you can do quickly. So that was a very fascinating process, that you need to have patience. You have to have certain skills to extract the colors. Another guy who we interviewed, his name is Kilu Wanchu. He's a wood carver. First of all, very fascinating to be in a space where you're surrounded with the smell of fresh wood. There's something very calming about it. So we entered his workshop. It was on the outskirts of Thimphu, and then we sat down. While he's still on his bench working with his tools, we are interviewing him, talking to him, understanding the process. He is very, very knowledgeable. Again, very young age, who are keeping this heritage culture tradition alive through their skills and practices. Very fascinating. You can see the drawings here. One of the things that I really liked about his is you can see his tools are all lined in front of him. And there are different tools for each of the carving that needs to be done. And these tools are his lifeline. He has invested in them. This is his. He doesn't let anyone touch them. So that was very fascinating, that as an artist, you really have respect for your tools. Another thing is how he talked about the wood pieces. We don't really think about, we are surrounded by nature and wood, but there are certain restrictions. There are certain kind of woods which are used for carving. So he spoke and gave us a little bit of knowledge about what kind of wood pieces that he uses for the carving materials. You can also see the team members that he works with in his workspaces. I really found it fascinating that when these days, a lot of it is done by machine carving and you can get it very easily, but some of the details which can only be achieved by hand. And he spoke a lot about when he looks at a certain piece, that you immediately know whether this piece is good or not. To have that sort of a skill and eye for something was very incredible for me. So these were some of the people we spoke to, and getting the privilege of writing their stories and getting to know their personal story, getting to know what their everyday looks like was very fascinating to me. And it has inspired me to also focus on my skill. I do a little bit of tailoring, and I recently joined a wood blocking workshop. So even in your own ways, you can work with these skills and learn something different and look at this everyday objects in a different way and try to upgrade yourself. So yeah, there are opportunities and places to learn these kind of skills.
And so I hope that these stories really help people connect to the ways that they themselves are knowledgeable, and also see all of the innovation that goes into something even like traditional arts, traditional cuisine, and really helps us feel connected to ideas about culture that are dynamic, that are lived, and that we each have a stake in. Even when I am walking down a street in New York City, if I pass an incense cellar and that smell hits me, I just instantly feel transported into those memories, into those moments, and into those connections. And so finding ways that we can build these, no matter where you are and what particular practices are meaningful to you, to feel like you have a stake in that and have something to say. So thank you so much for spending time with us, La.